car revolution did not happen by everyone becoming a mechanic. What happened is that cars became dramatically more reliable and easier to use, that you just basically got in, turned the key, and it worked, right? That's what we have to do at crypto.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have Nigel Eccles, co-founder and CEO of Vault. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with Nigel at Vault. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm here today with Nigel Eccles, co-founder and CEO of Vault. Nigel, what's up? How's it going today?
Not so bad. Surviving the bear.
Yep. I'm with you. Well, I know we have a ton of great stuff to talk about, so let's just jump right in. I think to start, I really just wanted to go way back because you've done a ton of really interesting stuff. So I think for the audience, if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about your background and really, because you're such a founder, how did you get into being such a founder in the first place? Like, take us all the way back.
Yeah, so I've been in tech since around 2000, so it's nearly 23 years. Originally in startups in the UK in the sports betting industry. So one company that's quite big is Flutter Entertainment. I was very early product manager there. But then I started my first company in 2007, which was a prediction market. Actually, pre some of the prediction markets around today. And that company 2 years later pivoted to become FanDuel. The fantasy sports betting products. So that kind of, and then the journey from there was about growing that. And I left FanDuel about 5 years ago. And since then, I've just sort of gone into more and more startups.
Perfect.
I nearly all focus on consumer. That's my passion. Although I've sort of advised a few B2B ones, but my real passion is consumer products.
Love it. Okay. Maybe give us that same kind of story, but for Web3 or crypto too, like when did that interest come to pass? How did it evolve?
Yeah. So I was reasonably late on that. So I'd say 2017 is the first that I really got a lot of awareness about it. I was looking at it and I was like, wow, this is so cool. I love the idea. Like Bitcoin didn't interest me because I was like, okay, it's a place to store wealth. I don't have any. It's like, this is not very interesting to me. Whereas Ethereum was just fascinating, this idea of a world computer, like a world decentralized computer. I thought that was the first time I was like, okay, this is cool. And I remember in 2017 going through CoinMarketCap and looking at every token and trying to understand it and kind of sort of getting a little disappointed because they were either like outside of Ethereum, they were all like, were kind of like Ethereum, or they didn't really make any sense at all. A couple of them were like prediction markets, which I knew a lot about, and I didn't think that they made a lot of sense, those instances of it. So in 2017, I dabbled a bit, but I really came to the conclusion that crypto was not ready for consumer products. Like the biggest consumer product then would have been probably CryptoKitties, and it was like buying a kitty was just so hard. And it also just didn't really it didn't really make sense because they were highly inflationary, like they just minted more kitties. And so I thought it was cool, but I just couldn't convince myself I want to commit my career to this. So that was kind of my first kind of foray into it. But I just, after 2017, honestly, actually even I sold, I think, because I bought some Ethereum and I sold it fall of 2017, just because I was kind of like, this is just not that interesting. Nothing to do with price. And then I only started to get back into it in 2020. I had started a sports card business and somebody alerted me to Top Shot. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is a real application. You can actually own a digital asset. And I could see it with sports cards where people loved, they collected these cards, and I could absolutely translate and say, well, there's no reason they need to be physical. They could be digital. And so Top Shot made a lot of sense to me. And so from there, I went from Top Shot to getting into NFTs. I bought quite a lot of Nifty Gateway, and then just really getting deeper and deeper and got into a lot into some of the social fi protocols, and then got on to Solana, early to mid 2021.
Perfect. Okay. And that, I know we're kind of jumping here, but maybe running up to the present with Vault, maybe talk a little bit about, what is Vault? Why does it matter to you to work in this kind of problem area?
Yeah.
And what are you guys building over there?
Yeah, absolutely. So music's just a fascinating category. It's something that it's probably the most universal products in the world. Everyone loves it, or nearly everyone loves it. But it's surprising to me is just how small the industry is. Like, coming from sports, I just assumed the industry was much bigger, and that I was really shocked that, there were artists that, that you would recognize, not the superstars, but the mid-tier who, would be losing money for the first, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of their career. And it just stunned me. And then when I looked at what music used to be like in the CD era, which was a lot healthier, discovering that a lot of the middle class of artists then made a lot more money then. And I thought, wow, this is really weird. It also reminded me of fantasy sports, because in fantasy sports, what we saw in 2009, we launched FanDuel, was people love fantasy sports, and they, if one of your friends plays it, you're going to know about it because they're going to tell you.
Totally.
If you're one of those friends. And so they're passionate about it. But in 2009, the companies that offered fantasy sports product didn't really make any money because they didn't really handle it. And the top players didn't really spend that much money with them. And so we were like, when we launched FanDuel, we were like, hey, if we could create a product that like really appeals to these top users, we could transform this industry. And we did. Like, so in 2009, fantasy sports was probably like a $50 million business. And this was run by ESPN and Yahoo. Today, fantasy sports is somewhere in the region of like $1 to $1.5 billion, right? Like, so it's totally transformed just from that insight, which is there's these passionate people who love this product, but they don't really have, any way to like express that. And we was one of the first people gave them that product. It's the same thing in music, which is if you love this artist, you're like, okay, how do I express that love of it, right? And you're like, okay, I can go and stream it on Spotify. Great. Now the artist is they'll make 3,500 per million streams, right? So you stream it 100 times and they're not even they're going to see any of that. So you're like, right. Okay, that's not great. Maybe I could buy a cap or a t-shirt. And you're like, really? So the insight for us was that basically there wasn't a way for super fans to really show their interest and express their interest in getting something in return. And when we look back, we saw that the products that 20 years ago, like vinyl and CD, were so much better. And one of the big things that was better about them was they were collectible. And so that's when it connected with crypto and said, look, with crypto, we can make a digital asset like an MP3 collectible again. We can make it scarce. We can work with an artist to say, let's create an album, put it in this format, and there's only going to be 100 of them, and there'll only ever be 100 of them. And so that if somebody bought that, and that was your first album came out and somebody bought it, that's a true fan right there. And so that was kind of the thought process. And we think the impact, and we think this is somewhere like a lot of businesses that use crypto, I would say, do you really need crypto for this? Here you need it because the fan needs to know that they own these files independent of Vault or Universal or Spotify, that they have their music collection and no one can take it away from them. So that was kind of the thought process, and that's what we're trying to do.
Love it. I think there's so many fascinating aspects of this where it does combine the collectibles piece with, you used the phrase actually, true fan. Speaking back, I have to think to Kevin Kelly's original notion back in 2008 of,
yes,
really only needing a few authentic true fans to kind of power a creative endeavor professionally. And so that was actually something I wanted to ask you about was like, I remember that being a very influential essay back then. I'm curious, how influenced by your thinking were you kind of explicitly in connecting those dots with this, and does it shape sort of, it sounds like it shaped decisions significantly.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we saw this, it's something a lot of time you don't see in business, but when you look at your customer data, and we looked at our, say, FanDuel customer data, it follows a very clear power law. So your top, FanDuel was very concentrated. Maybe top 5% of users were generating 80% of our revenue.
Oh, wow.
And so you basically see this drop off. And so the interesting thing is when we were running that business was it wasn't necessarily about CRM or retaining the very, very small users that might not want to play next week. It was about giving a great experience to that top 5%. Because we were like, lose some of that top 5%, you're going to see it. But those smaller users are less important. And so we very consciously were like, we're building a product for these top users. Like, how do we make their experience amazing? And so that's been a real driver. And one of the things about music, and this is the interesting thing, is 20 years ago, a top music fan would buy at least a CD a week, maybe even 2 CDs a week. inflation adjusted, that's $2,000. That's what they're spending per year. Same music fan, like literally the same fan today pays $120 because that's all they can, because they get it all for $10 a month. So that's kind of been a huge influence. And so when we think today, we're not building a product for 95% of the market. We're actually building a product for that top 5% that are like, I love this artist, I love their music, and I want to support them. And that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, just injecting more money into the industry kind of at large from the people who really, if there were opportunities, they would really want to give that money, spend that money.
You know, you chat to people and they'd say, you know, if we think about other things that you can collect, you know, we've seen for crypto, like, oh, we could collect movies or books, but when you talk to people, like movies and books are like, you know, I really love that series. But when you talk about music, that's like on a different level. Like music and sport, totally. I think have got a similar level of like passion where people are like, no, I love this artist, or, you know, I love this team, you know, like I will go to it. I will be like super, super committed. And so that's kind of what we're trying to build something for that fan.
Yeah, I really love it. So I'd love to talk about some of the, like, how does this practically intersect with the marketplace here? So maybe just talking use cases, because you guys have powered some great work with Fletcher and Sumsun and Pip and Pop Evil, a ton of great artists in their own right. I'm curious, you know, what does that process look like? How do you guys think about who you work with? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so really our focus is largely on independent artists. Very simple reasons: they have so much more flexibility. They own their own rights. They can sign off. If they say, I want to do it, we can do it like tomorrow. Whereas a lot of the signed artists, we can still work with them, and we have. So Fletcher is signed, Telescreens is signed, but they take a lot longer. And so we're really much more focused on people who own their own rights, or singer-songwriters. And what the artists that we love working with are the ones where we show them what the technology does, and then they're like, oh, I know exactly what I want to put in here. And I'll give you two examples. Jordan Hart, Canadian singer-songwriter, beautiful voice, amazing connection with his fans. And he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually working on a new album. I've got 6-7 songs that I'm just going to put on this limited edition. I'm only going to sell 50 of them. And I'm going to sell it to my fans. And they were like, and his pitch to his fans are like, look, I don't know, some of these songs might never get released again. So if you want to hear them, here's your chance. Boom, sold within like 24 hours. It was like incredible. He is not a big artist. Yeah. I think in revenue terms, like he did more from that drop than his previous album had done in like 6 months, right? So like that's, and he could still release those songs on Spotify. He never said, I'm not releasing these on Spotify. And so that was a good one. Another example is an artist called Blue Eyes, again, an independent artist, beautiful singer, very engaged fan base. And she said, you know, I've already dropped my EP, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a deluxe version, and it's going to have like voice memos, like the first time that I kind of came up with that tune.
Oh,
and then
cool.
The guitar riff and all of this stuff that if you knew those songs, you'd be like, oh, I love that. You know, wouldn't I love to hear how she produced it? And then she said, you know, I have a wall of handwritten notes of the lyrics to the song that I create my songs, and I just stick them up there, and I've never really thought what I could do with it. I'm going to put that in the vault as well. And so that again is one that like sold very, very quickly. And again, like I think it generated, I'm trying to remember that one. It was like several thousand, and it was like, she was great. I can go on tour with this. But those are artists who had deep connection with their fans, and they knew what their fans would love to get.
Love it. Yeah. I think related to that, you know, getting in the weeds here a little bit, but, you know, as a founder, as a CEO, you're running this new thing, right? I think there's always blockers, right? There's always, as you look at over the next year, say, there's obstacles that, you know, you're going to have to solve them, whether it's in the market or whether, you know, any variety of different categories. Mm-hmm. But then on the flip side too, there's opportunities maybe in those obstacles, but maybe also just, you know, things that you see could be big for Vault. I'm curious about both of those, like, you know, blockers to adoption and then biggest opportunities, maybe kind of both bracketed over the next 12 months.
Yeah. So I would say the blockers, the biggest one we've noticed in the music industry is actually quite a conservative industry. And one of the things was in 2021 when crypto really took off, unusually for the industry, they said, right, we're going to jump in and do this, right? We're going to embrace this. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that they embraced, like, just didn't work out because frankly, they just didn't really make a lot of sense. Like, just because I'm a fan of a band doesn't mean I want like a JPEG from them with no music,
Sure.
right? It's like,
Sure.
okay. And there was a lot of that. And so the industry like has sort of flipped back to sort of more natural conservatism again, which is like all the people who wanted to do new stuff, they're all gone, right? And everyone's like, yeah, we knew that crypto was like, was a waste of time. And, like, I'm glad we didn't do any more on it. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges. I'd say the biggest opportunity is we repeatedly have seen some major, major brand name artists do things that demonstrate they understand that, and like this, they knew this before me, but they understand that streaming under monetizes music. Like they want a new way to monetize music, and it's not either or, it's additive. They're like, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So if we think about a few years ago when Ye launched the stem player, that was Ye saying, my music's valuable. Like I want a way to sell it. I don't want to earn like cents for every million streams.
Sure.
I want a way to monetize it. Now, the problem was the stem player was a complicated technology that you had to plug into your laptop. Like it just wasn't, the technology wasn't right. But that idea that his music was worth more and people would pay more, he was 100% right. In fact, he sold millions of dollars worth of stem players, despite it being a terrible piece of technology. So it just shows you what's not. And another example is Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift, whenever she's dropping albums, she does bonus tracks that only appear on her physical. So you get it if you buy her vinyl, you get it if you buy her CD. You don't get it on Spotify. And some of those tracks are major. You'll hear them on the radio and you hear them say, yeah, you'll not get this on Spotify. This is only if you actually buy her music. Again, here we have one of the absolute pinnacle kind of businesswomen in this industry, like one of the people who are the most forward thinking about music. And she's like, no, there's some of my fans, maybe the mass market don't want these extra songs, and that's fine. But my top fans are going to want all my music, and they will pay for it, and they'll very happily pay for it. And so we definitely see today that some of the most creative minds in the music industry are saying there's a need here. And what we feel is we have a way to solve that need, that, like stem player is not going to cut it, right? Vinyl is like, I love vinyl. It looks great on my wall and I feel cool when I walk out of the record shop with it, but I never play it because I play my music on my phone, right? And I think that's true for like most people, vinyl collectors. I say vinyl is not a music format anymore. It's home decor. So we want a format that you can collect and then you can play it on your phone and then you can show your friends that you have it and that, yes, you spotted this band years ago and that you would never resell this thing that you bought then because you're a true fan. That's what we're trying to build.
I love it. Okay. One last question here on Vault, and then I want to talk a little bit about kind of the space in general. But that last question, I'm curious because you're dealing with artists and you're dealing with fans, right? Like, I think Web3's complexity, that's sort of notorious at this point. A lot of people are talking about how do you abstract away that complexity to make it an easy experience for everyone involved, the listeners, the artists. How do you and your team think about that?
Yeah, it's hard. No doubt about it. I think one of the biggest challenges has been in Web3 is, that the infrastructure, it reminds me of whenever cars were first invented. And if you drove a car, you also had to be a mechanic, right? Like you knew how to crank it up and change the oil. And, you had to do all of that, right? And so it was a hobbyist industry. Crypto is like that today. Like you have to go and get a wallet and then you have to remember the seed phrase and you have to learn so much that it will never be a mass market consumer product in its current format. Like it just never. And there's some people in crypto, and I think they're delusional. They sort of think, no, they have to learn. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's your view, it's never going mass market. Like the car revolution did not happen by everyone becoming a mechanic. What happened is that cars became dramatically more reliable and easier to use, that you just basically got in, turned the key, and it worked, right? That's what we have to do with crypto. And it's really hard right now as a company that builds consumer products. We have to build all of that or most of that ourselves. So, we need somebody to rock up, download the app, and buy it within the app. Well, that means that we need to provision a wallet. We need to handle all of the transactions in the back end so that the user doesn't see any of that. Because as soon as we start saying, oh, go off and get a wallet and go to Coinbase and get some crypto and come back, like our conversion will be fractions. Like it'll be 0.001%. We know because we tested it. So that's the biggest handicap we have today.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's something a lot of people are wrestling with and trying to solve in different ways. But let's talk about the space at large. So, I think you're in a unique position because you can kind of speak to what's going on in crypto and also kind of what's going on in creative industries. Mm-hmm. And so I'm most curious about that intersection, really. Like, what are we getting right and what are we getting wrong here in 2023 at that intersection of sort of creative world meets crypto?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think for us, when we started designing Vault, like music was front and foremost, but we did look at other verticals and said, well, this could maybe also work for college stars, or could this work for movies? And we definitely came back and said music is the one that people want to collect. And that's the one where it's also the industry with the greatest need, where we saw that artists were being under-monetized and that there was an opportunity. So I think that's what sort of brought us to music. I'd say more broadly within the creative space, we're seeing, we're definitely seeing huge democratization. But the weird thing that we're seeing is it's actually, in a lot of spaces, if they're not sort of controlled by unions like Hollywood, it can be really bad for the middle. So, we obviously know the Chris Anderson book about the long tail. The long tail is true, but the other thing that we've seen is a hollowing out of the middle. So the superstars do great, and they're actually doing even better. There's a long tail of sort of pro-am and amateurs, but then the sort of the middle, the people who would have been like professional musicians 20 years ago, they're struggling a lot more. And I think partly because there's just so much more competition from the tail. So, for example, on Spotify today, the stat is that there's 100,000 new tracks uploaded every day.
You're kidding. So that's crazy.
Which is insane, which you sort of think about. Now, a huge, like there's another stat, something like 40% of them have have 0 listens or less than 2 listens.
Oh,
so
brutal.
even the person uploading them is not listening to them. But it's an intense amount of competition and very, very challenging for those middle tier. The reason the top tier are doing well, the very top artists, is this sort of perverse cascade effect, which is when there's so much supply, what happens as a consumer, you go, okay, what are the brands that I know? Or who are the people that I trust that tell me what I should listen to? And so in effect, having so much supply actually concentrates people's interest in the very, very top artists, because you have these basically cascading effects, which is, well, radio really gets to decide, or TikTok, and then they drive everyone to these top artists. So that's been a really, really interesting phenomena that's sort of been bad for, it's great for the pro-am, like the people who are like, there's a friend of mine who runs a distributing business, and he says, we're kind of dentists with guitars, right? Like they make their money as a dentist, but they want their music on Spotify. And that's a really big business, and it's great for them, but it does sort of hollow out this middle, and that's where there's a real challenge at the moment.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at the dynamics. And it really answers the question all in one answer, where there's some right with that and there's some wrong with that, and it's definitely changing.
It's sort of, I'm not so sure it's sort of right and wrong. Like it's a challenge, for in the middle.
That's a better way to frame it.
Yeah, like we're definitely seeing, one of the things we've seen with TikTok, there's a TikTokization of music. We're seeing these musicians go viral and they get a huge number, but they actually don't have fans. So, it's a big concern in the music industry. They're not breaking new artists. They would say that like Olivia Rodrigo is probably the last big artist to be broken. She's gone mainstream, like she can sell out stadiums. And the artists that have sort of broken through TikTok might have a huge viral hit, but they went to like MSG, they could have maybe only sell 10% of it. And that's a real challenge in the music industry, is that, okay, how do you translate, virality into a career that and then get those people up the funnel from being, I love that song, to being, I love that artist and I will buy that album and I'll go to the stadium to see her.
Yep. Okay, Nigel, maybe two last questions here for you. First question, I'm curious, having done this a lot in tech broadly and then also in crypto now, I'm curious
Hmm.
what your advice for founders would be, maybe particular to the crypto space. Like if you could kind of
Yeah.
impart advice to someone like you coming in like you did a few years
Hmm.
ago, what would you want to
Yeah.
impart?
Yeah. It's the same within crypto and outside, but it's strangely, it seems to be more important to say it in crypto, which is you need to focus on customers, you know, on the use case, why they want this product. I feel that there's a lot of crypto that's still kind of like, don't worry, it's coming back. And I'm like, if we all sit around saying crypto's coming back, then it's never going to come back. Like we
Right.
need some, like if we look at the 2020, 2021 cycle, like that was really driven by what I would call real use cases like NFTs and to lesser extent DeFi. NFTs sort of presented themselves as something that consumers really did connect with. Obviously, they were overpromised, they overhyped, but there was something really there that consumers got excited about, and then obviously got overtaken by speculation. But there's still something meaty there, right? There's still something that people are like, I can own a digital asset. That's cool. I couldn't do that before. And I sort of feel that, entrepreneurs in crypto today, like we've got to be working on something that is going to connect with consumers, that's going to get us back. Because if we don't, then I don't see why it should come back. Like the only reason it really kind of everything shot up in 21 is everyone got really excited about the future because we saw this innovation.
Yep.
If over the next 2, 3, 4 years, all we see is like more infrastructure and everyone's sort of waiting for the market to come back, then I just don't see why it would. Like that's the
Yeah.
biggest one is, and then it's like it's focus on who the customers are and why they want this and why it needs to be in crypto. Because if it doesn't need to be in crypto, I wouldn't work in crypto. Like it's, at the end of the day, it's a big, slow, difficult to build on database. It is not a technology you would use unless you really have to.
Yeah, I think it's terrific advice, truly. So, Nigel, last question here. What's your team working on right now? And what's the best way for people to follow along on the journey or get involved?
Yeah, so we're actually working on something really cool right now. And it kind of takes me back to 14 years ago when we started Vandal. So 14 years ago, we were doing this prediction market and we said, okay, this is not working. Let's try a new product. Let's actually try fantasy. And so we decided that we were going to take fantasy as it stood, which was season long. We were going to make it faster and more exciting. And we did like an internal alpha using like Excel. And we're like, that was pretty cool. And then we kind of iterated and we iterated, and that became FanDuel, which is now a business that'll do $5 billion in revenue. So just over the last couple of weeks, we started to do the same with Vault. We created this fantasy music manager product, and we're doing an internal alpha test on it. Basically, it's very simple. What you do is you have to pick a roster of 5 artists, and each of them, you buy their Vault, so you own it. That becomes your portfolio. And then we score your roster every week based on their performance on Spotify monthly listeners. So that's an external metric that can't be gamed, that tells you whether your artists are doing really well or not, right? Because if it's going up, it's good. If it's not, it's not good. And so we've been running that. We're now coming into week 3, and the feedback's been phenomenal. Everyone loves it. Everyone says they know music and but when it gets into it, you're like, okay, well, which of these artists? And so we've been running that. If you go to Vault Music on Twitter, if you search on Twitter for Vault Music, or I'm Nigel Eccles on Twitter, you'll see. And we've just opened up, like just today, we've opened up a wait list for it. But we think this could be really dramatically interesting for the music industry, because everyone says they love like discovering new artists, but it's quite hard to do. We actually not only make that process fun, but we actually make it rewarding. Like you can now if you pick the right 5, then that can be rewarding, like immediately. But then you also own that asset that in years to come, you're like, yeah, I knew Sid Simon's a New York artist that I love. I knew about him when he had 5,000 followers, and I can show you because I have this. So that's something we're launching at the moment.
Very cool. Nigel, thank you so much for the time. Fascinating work you guys are doing, and love getting to hear how you think about things and what you've been up to. So hope the rest of the week finishes well, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
All right. Bye-bye.